It's been called NASA's 7 minutes of terror. The agonizing moment when decades of research and engineering, not to mention hundreds of millions of dollars, will be put to the test as a spacecraft burns through the Martian atmosphere, plummeting at thousands of miles per hour to gently land on the hard and unforgiving Martian surface.
Although we've done it before, landing on Mars is hard, and this mission is no different.
The world will watch with bated breath as 8 years' worth of planning all comes down to these 7 minutes, where those involved with the mission can only sit, watch, and hope that their creation survives.
And NASA's InSight, the first outer space robotic explorer to study the interior of Mars.
Launched on a foggy morning on May 5th, 2018, NASA's newest Martian explorer, the InSight lander, is currently rocketing towards the red planet at speeds of over 6,000 miles per hour, fast enough to cross the continental United States in less than 30 minutes. Its mission? To give Mars its first ever internal checkup.
The basic idea of InSight is to map out the deep structure of Mars for the very first time. We're going to map out the thickness of the crust, the size of the core, sort of get the first map of the inside of Mars.
And on November 26th, at precisely 12 o'clock Pacific time, if the InSight lander survives the fiery descent, it'll reach its final destination, an 81-mile-long, 17-mile-wide plain known as Elysium Planitia.
We wanted a very boring site with not too many rocks. That way we could land safely and also have a place where we could deploy the instruments so that they wouldn't be rocks in the way of where we wanted to put the instruments. So we'll be landing in Elysium Planitia. It's about 4 degrees north of the equator of Mars. We have to be near the equator because we're solar powered, and we want to be able to last through the Martian winter, so we need to be able to make sure we can get enough sun during the winter time.
A location with extended sunlight will prove key to the success of the craft's 2-year undertaking. But perhaps the most important in choosing a landing site was minimizing the dangers to the spacecraft and its $825 million mission.
There's a lot of constraints we had to deal with. One of them was that we had to have enough atmosphere above us to allow us to slow down for landing, so that we had a good site that was far enough down and not too high in elevation. The atmosphere of Mars is actually very, very thin. So you actually have to take it into account so that you slow down as you enter the atmosphere, or otherwise you could burn up. So we also have to use not only a heat shield, but a parachute and rockets to land on Mars gently.
Landing on Mars is one of the most difficult and precise maneuvers in space exploration. The process known as entry, descent, and landing will have the InSight team at the edge of their seats as they helplessly wait to hear a faint signal telling them the spacecraft survived the harrowing 6 minutes and 45 seconds it'll take to reach Martian soil.
It takes thousands of steps to go from the top of the atmosphere to the surface, and each one of them has to work perfectly to be a successful mission.
And on Monday, November 26th, at 12 p.m. Pacific time, we'll learn whether or not InSight survives its plunge into Mars.
Just 7 minutes before arriving to the top of the Mars atmosphere is to separate the cruise stage. Before you hit the top of the atmosphere, though, the space capsule has to orient itself so that the heat shield is precisely facing the atmosphere. Now the fun begins. The vehicle is moving at nearly 13,000 miles an hour, but it's hitting the top of the atmosphere at a very shallow angle, 12 degrees. Any steeper, the vehicle will hit the thicker part of the atmosphere and it will melt and burn up. Any shallower, the vehicle will bounce off the atmosphere of Mars. At the very top of the atmosphere, it's about 70 miles above the surface of Mars, and the air is starting to get thicker and thicker and thicker. As it does that, the temperature on that heat shield gets well over 1,000 degrees centigrade, enough to melt steel. Over the next 2 minutes, the vehicle decelerates from 13,000 miles an hour to about 1,000 miles an hour. At about 10 miles above the surface of Mars, a supersonic parachute is launched out of the back of the vehicle, 6 pyrotechnic devices fire simultaneously, allowing the heat shield to fall and tumble away from the vehicle, exposing the lander to the surface of Mars. 10 seconds after the heat shield is dropped, 3 pyrotechnically deployed legs are released and locked for landing. About a minute later, the landing radar is turned on, sending pulses toward the surface of Mars as the vehicle starts to try to measure how high it is above the surface and how fast it's going. At about a mile above the surface of Mars, the lander falls away from the back shell and lights its engines. And very quickly, the vehicle must rotate out of the way so that the parachute and the back shell doesn't come down to hit it. The last thing that has to happen is that on the moment of contact, the engines have to shut down immediately. If they don't, the vehicle will tip over.
If everything goes exactly according to plan, InSight will signal its successful landing to anxious humans back at JPL, with a little bit of help from some nearby friends. There were 2 stowaways joining InSight on its trip to our neighboring planet. Known as the Mars Cube 1, or MARCO, these briefcase-sized satellites will act as a communications relay between our planet and Mars. They'll beam data from InSight back to the control room, where team members will have to wait an agonizing 8 additional minutes for the signal to arrive back to Earth.
So we have 2 types of antennas on the InSight lander that are used for communication. So this one is an X-band antenna. There are 2 X-band antennas. These antennas communicate direct to Earth and receives the commands daily.
After its solar arrays are deployed to power the craft, InSight will take pictures of the landing site so that engineers and scientists back home can formulate a detailed plan of attack.
So there's one camera that's mounted underneath the deck. It's got a fisheye view and gets the area right where I'm standing in front of the workspace. The second camera is mounted on the forearm of the robotic arm, and that sees anywhere we place the arm.
The camera will also take 3-dimensional stereo images of the workspace, allowing scientists and engineers to select the best place to deploy the instruments. That data will then be used with an augmented reality headset that will provide holographic imagery to help accurately imitate the landing site. Seen here in red, the data from Mars is superimposed on the lab's gravel sandbox and will then be shaped to resemble the area, helping the team find the best suitable location to employ the instrument.
It will take InSight and the team on the ground 2 to 3 months to deploy the instruments on Mars after InSight lands.
And while 3 months may seem like an awfully long time, in space exploration, patience is a virtue. Besides, it'll give the team back home plenty of time to catch their breath after InSight's terrifying 7-minute freefall.